The red and blue lights streaked our driveway in alternating flashes as my wife stepped out of her rental car. Commander Alyssa Thompson, still in her dress whites after 8 months at sea, looked more puzzled than worried. The woman yelling from across the street, however, seemed ready to burst a vein. That was my first real introduction to our HOA president, though I'd learned her name was Patricia Garrison only after the officers began issuing citations. My wife had texted me from Norfolk that morning. A brief message. On my way home. Can't wait to see you. 8 months aboard the USS Truman had felt like 8 years. I'd scrubbed the house twice, bought her favorite flowers, and even tried to cook that pasta dish she loved. What I hadn't prepared for was our neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer deciding my wife was a threat to suburban order. Patricia Garrison ruled our Cedar Heights neighborhood like her own private fiefdom. She measured grass height with an actual ruler. She timed how long garbage cans lingered at the curb. She once fined the Andersons $75 because their garden gnome faced the wrong way. I'd managed to stay off her radar for 2 years by keeping quiet and following every absurd rule. But apparently, having a wife return from military deployment wasn't in the HOA playbook. I was in the kitchen when I heard the uproar. Through the window, I saw Alyssa standing by her car, hands visible, speaking calmly to 2 police officers. Patricia stood behind them, gesticulating wildly, her voice echoing across the street. Something about suspicious individuals and stolen valor, and how real military people don't just show up unannounced. I rushed outside, my heart racing. The scene was bizarre. My wife, who'd spent months commanding operations in the Persian Gulf, being questioned in our own driveway while Patricia jabbed her finger in the air, demanding immediate arrest. A growing crowd of neighbors watched from their lawns, some recording on their phones. Officer Daniels, according to his nameplate, raised a hand as I approached. His partner, Officer Nguyen, continued questioning Alyssa. She responded with military precision, her voice steady despite the absurdity. Yes, she lived here. Yes, she was returning from deployment. No, she didn't think she needed permission to come home to her own house. Patricia's voice grew shriller with each answer. She insisted real military personnel would have notified the HOA board before returning. She claimed the uniform was probably bought online. She demanded they check for weapons because everyone knows military imposters are dangerous. The woman actually used the phrase, "I pay your salary," 3 times in 2 minutes. Then Officer Nguyen asked for identification. Alyssa reached into her pocket slowly, producing her military ID. The change was immediate. Nguyen's eyes widened, his posture stiffened. He showed the ID to Daniels, whose expression shifted from routine boredom to something close to alarm. They both looked at the rank insignia on Alyssa's uniform, then at each other, then back at the ID. Officer Daniels cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Alyssa with noticeably more respect. "I apologize for the mix-up. We had a report of suspicious activity." Alyssa nodded, still composed. She understood they were doing their job. What she didn't understand was why Patricia was now ranting about knowing the police chief personally. That's when Officer Nguyen surprised everyone. He stepped back, adjusted his uniform, and snapped a salute. "Former Navy, ma'am. Machinist mate, 2nd class. Served on the Lincoln. It's an honor." Patricia's mouth fell open. The crowd murmured. Alyssa returned the salute with practiced ease, and I saw her shoulders relax slightly. The power dynamic shifted, like a tide turning. Suddenly, Patricia wasn't the one in charge. The officers turned their attention to her, asking why she called 911 for a non-emergency. Did she understand that filing false reports was a crime? Was she aware that interfering with military personnel was a federal matter? Patricia sputtered, her face cycling through shades of red I didn't know existed. Alyssa stepped forward then, still maintaining her military bearing. "Officers, I appreciate your response. However, I'd like to go inside and see my husband. It's been a long deployment." She glanced at Patricia, who seemed to shrink under the gaze. "Unless there's an actual crime being reported." Patricia tried one last gambit. She pulled out her phone, claiming she had the HOA bylaws that clearly stated all residents must notify the board of extended absences and returns. She scrolled frantically, muttering about proper protocols and community standards. The officers looked unimpressed. One of them asked if she'd like them to review her recent 911 calls, mentioning something about multiple reports of suspicious packages that turned out to be Amazon deliveries. The crowd grew larger. I recognized most of our neighbors, people who'd suffered under Patricia's reign for years. The Johnsons, fined for having the wrong shade of beige on their shutters. The Gwynns, cited for their children's bicycle being visible from the street for more than 30 minutes. Everyone who'd been nickeled and dimed by arbitrary rules was watching their tormentor face actual authority. Officer Daniels took out his notepad. "Ma'am," he said to Patricia, "I'm issuing you a warning for misuse of emergency services. Another call like this, and you'll be cited. Additionally, making false claims about military personnel could result in federal charges. I suggest you return to your home and rethink your approach to neighborhood watch." Patricia's hands shook as she took the warning. Her voice cracked as she tried to argue about her rights as HOA president. Alyssa handled it with grace. She thanked the officers for their service and their time. She shook hands with Officer Nguyen, who asked about the Truman's latest deployment. They chatted briefly about ports and duty stations, while Patricia stood frozen, warning citation in hand. The crowd began dispersing, but not before several neighbors offered Alyssa welcome home wishes. Mrs. Chen from 2 doors down actually clapped. As the police cars pulled away, Patricia found her voice again. "This isn't over," she hissed. "The HOA board will hear about this. You've violated multiple bylaws. Your grass is probably over regulation height." Alyssa finally looked directly at her. "Ma'am, I've spent 8 months dealing with actual threats to national security. Your tape measure doesn't intimidate me." The silence that followed was glorious. We went inside, leaving Patricia on the sidewalk, still clutching her warning. Through the window, I watched her storm back to her house, nearly tripping over the Andersons' correctly positioned garden gnome. Alyssa collapsed on the couch, finally letting her exhaustion show. "Some homecoming," she said, with a weary smile. I sat beside her, still processing what had happened. "At least you didn't have to face enemy fire," I offered. She laughed. Enemy fire was less predictable than suburban politics. That evening, word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Text messages buzzed between houses. The neighborhood Facebook group, usually filled with Patricia's proclamations about lawn violations, erupted with celebration emojis and barely contained glee. Someone posted the video of Officer Nguyen saluting Alyssa, and it had 47 reactions within an hour. For the first time in 3 years, Cedar Heights felt like a community instead of a low-security prison. Patricia didn't take defeat quietly. She spent the rest of the day marching from house to house with a clipboard, trying to rally support. Most people didn't even open their doors. The ones who did listened politely before closing them in her face. I watched from our window as she stood on the Petersons' porch for 10 minutes, ringing the doorbell while they were clearly home. Their car was in the driveway. Their TV was visible through the window. They simply refused to acknowledge her existence. By sunset, Patricia had resorted to leaving typed notices on everyone's doors. The letters, printed on what she probably thought was official HOA letterhead, demanded an emergency meeting to discuss what she called a hostile military takeover of our peaceful community. She cited 17 different bylaws, none of which actually existed. She threatened legal action against anyone who supported the illegal coup against her rightful authority. She even suggested that Alyssa's military status was suspicious and required investigation by Homeland Security. The next morning brought unexpected vindication. Dr. Harrison from the HOA board knocked on our door at 7:30 sharp, looking both embarrassed and relieved. He was a retired pediatrician who'd served on the board for 5 years, mostly to prevent Patricia from implementing her more extreme measures. Behind him stood 4 other board members, including Mrs. Foster, who ran the local bakery, and Mr. Ramirez, who'd fought Patricia's attempt to ban wind chimes just last month. They came inside, and Mrs. Foster handed Alyssa a welcome home cake she'd baked at 4 that morning. The board had convened an emergency session at 6, she explained. Every member had received multiple complaints about yesterday's incident. The vote was unanimous. Patricia Garrison was removed as HOA president, effective immediately. But that wasn't all. They'd reviewed her history of 9/11 calls, 37 false reports in 18 months, including claims about terrorist activity, when the Kumars had a family reunion, and allegations of drug dealing when teenage kids were selling lemonade. Dr. Harrison pulled out his phone to show us the final tally. The city had fined Patricia $500 for misuse of emergency services. The police department was considering additional charges for harassment and filing false reports. But the real shock came from Patricia's employer. It turns out she worked as an office manager for a local law firm. Someone had forwarded them the video of her demanding the arrest of an active duty military officer. The firm, which proudly displayed "Support Our Troops" stickers in their window, was mortified. We found out about her job loss when the moving truck appeared 3 days later. Patricia tried to supervise the movers while maintaining her composure, but it was hard to look authoritative when carrying a box labeled "Kitchen Miscellaneous" in shaky handwriting. The entire neighborhood seemed to develop urgent outdoor chores that day. Gardens were tended. Driveways were swept. Everyone wanted to witness the end of an era. As the moving truck pulled away, Patricia made one last stand. She marched to our door, shoulders squared, chin raised. When I opened it, she thrust an envelope at me. "A bill," she announced, "for grass height violations dating back 2 years. Total claimed $3,200. I looked at the paper, then at her, then at Alyssa, who'd joined me at the door. Patricia's hands trembled as she waited for our response. Alyssa took the paper, examined it carefully, then did something I didn't expect. She smiled. "Ma'am, you're absolutely right. Some of these grass measurements do exceed HOA guidelines by 1/8 of an inch. However, since you're no longer HOA president, and since you've been removed from the property for cause, this document has no legal standing, but I'll keep it as a memento of your dedicated service to our community." Patricia's face cycled through several expressions before settling on shock. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for breath. Then, without another word, she turned and walked to her car, where the last of her belongings waited. The entire neighborhood watched her drive away. Someone started clapping, then another. Soon, 40 people were giving her departure a standing ovation. Her stunned shriek as she sped out of Cedar Heights was the last we ever heard from Patricia Garrison.